Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was April 30th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt Cara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. We're here. Today's document, folks, this is one that is like the jewel of the entire podcast. It's one that really makes me so interested in Joan and Violant. The pathos in this document is so intense. Remember that Violant is, at this time, 23 years old. She's 23 years old. She has spent almost half of her life under the annoying kind of enmity of her mother-in-law, the Queen of the Crown of Aragon, Sibylla de Fortia. And finally, she is now queen. She has been queen for 4 months, maybe a little bit more than 4 months. And it's all about to come crashing down. I don't know how much we can say about whether and how much she loved Joan. It's very difficult to break through the archival language, the centuries of time, and to try to imagine with any hope of being accurate at all what love might have felt like, and especially when this is your job to go marry somebody, when you're a member of a royal family like Violant was. It's her job to go be married to somebody. And whether you end up liking the person, that was just not really how a marriage decision was made. You were betrothed in these elite marriages, and often in the non-elite ones too. Yes, consent was a factor in medieval marriage. It was actually known to be a very important part of marriage in the everyday sense. For everyday people, you would not really have a valid marriage if one of the parties did not consent. There's a lot of tales, like you can look at examples in Chaucer and other kind of cultural products that show that for most people in the Middle Ages in Western Europe, consent and love played a role in two people getting married. But when we look at this elite level, where you have these kings, these princes, basically paying the dowry for somebody that they've never even seen, right? As in the case with Joan and Violant. It just really seems like the idea that we can ascribe love to this is very fraught, right? Now, the title of the podcast is Molt cara compagnona. And I made that decision because I think that by the time we get into, well, I would say 1391, 1392, 1393, we can detect that there was something more going on between Joan and Violant. It might not be so much that they are like madly in love with each other. I wouldn't say that I could support that as an interpretation with evidence, historical evidence, but that there's a level of affection that allows them to cooperate on a level that is not typical. Remember, powerful queens, powerful elite women in the Middle Ages, not exceptional. That happened frequently. But what was going on in terms of the cooperation between Joan and Violant, I think that was unusual. At least the documentation of it is unusual. And my theory is that what happened with Joan's body in these early months of their reign, and truth be told, he was a sickly person, and it was happening before Pere the Ceremonious died. But when they're starting out as king and queen, and you have Joan stricken by a debilitating illness, what then becomes necessary is a different kind of working relationship. And you can't just have your male counselors doing the work for you, because they're not really going to be having access to your body in the way that your wife does. So Violant, because Joan's problem is bodily, she has a certain kind of role that you just are not going to see in a lot of other examples from the Middle Ages. I think it would be super interesting, and I need to read up on other sickly monarchs and elite men and see what was going on with their wives, the queens, the duchesses, so on. But I can tell you that with Joan and Violant, I think it's not reading into it to look at documents like today's and think of them as foundational to a kind of relationship that just had this higher level of cooperation between these two people, that they learned to depend on each other. Violant learned how to depend on Joan's legal status in order to keep the monarchy going. Joan learned how to depend on Violant's competence and political instinct. And at this early stage in their reign, things get so bad in terms of Joan's health that it just switches it up from what it normally would be. That's my theory. This document today is a really good expression of that whole dynamic that I just mentioned. The letter starts out on folio 17R of Register 2037. And it starts out kind of normal. Basically, Violant is saying, I've received your letters, and, we're going to talk about some negotiated things, blah, 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 using vague language. By the way, the recipient, which we should always say at the outset, it's the ambassadors to the Papal Court in Avignon, the ambassadors that Joan and Violant have sent over there, the ambassadors who are seeking to get some concessions from the Pope, financial things, as well as other jurisdictional things, more power for the King of the Crown of Aragon over certain things like ecclesiastical appointments. So they've got their business, they've got their negotiating points. We've seen a little bit of that in some earlier documents. So Violant is basically using the typical language of, I got your letters, and now I want you to keep negotiating, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like the scribe, it's Bartolomeo Sirvent. Bartolomeo Sirvent, it's like he knows that an unusual shift is going to happen in this letter. And so he's signaling it. Because often, and this is, I have not seen this symbol before in a letter, but it's in line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, line 6 toward the end. And the first word in the new section of the letter, I think it's item sapiats, que demenge propria passat. But before that item, there's a bracket. And that bracket, it's almost like you can see the pathos. It's like the scribe, Bartolomeo Sirvent. He might have been there right outside the room, or maybe even in the room, seeing Joan get last rites. So he's been through something. He's been through almost the end of a reign. And he's seen just, the terror of the king almost dying. And so he makes that bracket. And he's like, this is a special part of this document now. And you can just kind of imagine him as he's got the ink on his quill or stylus, right? He's making it extra thick, that bracket. And now, what happened? What happened on Sunday? Well, next line. Apres vespers, venc al signore fort greu accident de syncope. After Vespers, which is the sunset prayer time, it came, this word venc, it's interesting because you don't really see that form of venir, the verb venir, to come. You don't see that too much in these documents. It just adds to this urgency. So it came to the Lord King, a strong, grave misfortune of syncope. That word, it's some kind of illness, some kind of feverish illness. Maybe it's like a seizure. Then it goes on, per lo qual perde la paraula, meaning he could not speak. He lost his power of speech is a way of translating that. Now I'm just going to do the rest in the English translation. And his extremities grew very cold, and he came to the point of death. And until the hour of midnight, he was greatly, I don't know, this word is hard to translate, but something like laid out, like laid down. But then, a little later, by the grace of our Lord, he improved, And that improvement continued until the next day, which was Monday. So we get the day-by-day account here after midday. And at that hour, in the middle of Monday, another strong attack came upon him, on account of which he was so worsened that everyone remained nearly despairing of his life, and were certain of the opinion that imminently or in the night he would end his days. On account of which all those of the court and of the city were grievously distressed, and showing well their natural loyalty and great affection. And singularly, we ourselves were thrown, so this is Violant, I myself, Violant, was thrown into turmoil and tribulation beyond measure. And we had and have singular reasons for such emotion. And then the said Lord King very solemnly and devoutly received communion and received the body of Christ. Let's pause here. The word that is used, it's not just last rites, it's not just the last prayers. It is a particular word. It is, oh gosh, what I have it in my notes here. Hold on just a second. Viaticum. Okay. The viaticum, that is the communion wafer. It's the Eucharist that is administered to somebody. It is basically admitting that this person is going to die. Okay. So in that moment, what she is saying is that all hope was lost. And literally in another letter, we're going to see that she writes that the doctors had given up hope. I don't think she says that in this one. But she goes on. But afterwards, after he had been given the very last rites, the divine grace worked, that grace which is, all merited, and the said Lord, he recovered with such great improvement, which from hour to hour has for now and is still continuing, so that he is now very well, and blessed be our Lord for it, in whom we hope that soon he, the King, will be restored to full health, and we shall see him preserved for a long time. And we notify you of this event so that you may know the truth, and that from the good improvement of the Lord King you may have pleasure and consolation, rendering praises and thanks to the Holy Trinity, making special prayers for the health of the said Lord. And if until now you have attended diligently to the affairs for which you are there, henceforth attend to them with even more diligence, applying yourselves with full effort, so that soon those efforts will reach the conclusion that we desire. And so then she goes on a little bit more, saying, we'll tell you more about the king's condition as we know more. And that is what Violant writes to the ambassadors in Avignon. So yesterday I started just riffing on, why is it the ambassadors that get these most personal details? And why isn't she writing these personal details to someone that she's more personally connected to, like her parents? And as I was talking about it, I just kind of had this idea that she's got sort of like a confluence of motives for telling the ambassadors in Avignon about this. First, it's like miraculous, right? There's been a miracle. God has interceded. And so, if God came down and saved Joan, you gotta say it. You gotta let people know. You've got to let the Pope know that God has favored Joan. So there's just like, this is amazing. We know that God intervened. The Pope should know that God intervened. And then there's the more calculating version, which, both can be true, which is that if you show that God favors Joan, that really does strengthen the negotiating position for the ambassadors in Avignon, right? Like, how are you gonna, if you're on the opposite side of the table and the people come in and they say, look, God has intervened and saved this king, and so you'd better change your position and make some concessions because the will of God has been voiced, right? So it improves the strength of your bargaining as long as Joan isn't, then, killed by the disease, which is a risk. But Violant, she does like to bet the house. And I'll just say really quick that one example of this happens later when Joan actually did die, which is in 1396. So about 9 years from this document. When Joan does die, it is a surprise. It happens outside of the house, outside of the castle, outside of the palace. He's out hunting, and he dies. And I believe that these are suspicious circumstances, but the scholarship is not unified on that. Some say that it's just a simple hunting accident. Happens all the time. But anyway, it's a surprise. And how does Violant respond? She responds, I mean, maybe not like right away, but like within a day, she says she's pregnant. Yeah. She says she's pregnant. And this has been regarded in the secondary literature as an example of Violant being unhinged. And that's because she actually wasn't pregnant. I mean, she was put under watch. Maria de Luna, her sister-in-law, puts her on watch because the person who's going to inherit the throne is Joan's brother, Marti. And Marti is away in Sicily, and so it's Maria de Luna who takes over and runs the government. Yeah. Sounds familiar, right? And during that period in 1396, Maria de Luna arranges for I don't know who, but people that she trusts, matronly folks, I believe, to just constantly watch Violant. And Violant is put under house arrest and is under constant watch to see if her claim that she's pregnant is true. Now, Violant might have honestly believed that in May of 1396 she was pregnant, but even if she didn't believe it and just said it, it's a smart move because she knows what can happen to the widow of the king. She knows because she did it to Sibylla de Fortia. And so by saying that she's pregnant, she buys herself some time to figure out her next move. But what that shows, that episode in 1396, it shows that at least by that time, she was ready to deal with the shock of the death of her husband, and she had been through some scares before, and this is maybe the first real one. I'm not sure if Joan had ever been quite as near death as this moment in April of 1387. So here we have Violant, I think, understanding that God has performed an intervention to save Joan, and also that politically this has an effect. And so she writes to the ambassadors to share the miracle and also to further the political goals at hand. And I think that doesn't diminish her in any way at all. That shouldn't be read to say that she was cold or calculating or didn't care about Joan all that much, so that in this moment, which was very scary, she was thinking politics. It's just that her life is politics. She's queen. She was in line to inherit the throne from the moment she set foot in the Crown of Aragon. She grew up in the royal family of France. She lived in Paris in the court of Charles V. She saw that politics was everything, that you didn't have a life outside of your political role. So of course, when something happens that is of the body, she is writing as it applies to of the state. Did that sentence make sense? I think it did. I'm feeling the passion of this. Wanted it to be a beautiful sentence. But you know what? This is the first draft. This is the historian's notebook. So if I am able to get some kind of wonderful rhetorical flourish out of this, well, that's great. But that is not the point. The point is that I think aloud and that I'm not really prepared, and that you can listen to this on the faster speed because I kind of sound it out as I go. But it's this particular document that to me just really captures so much of Violant and her political talent, her emotional strength, the fact that she was there, right? She's not someplace else, living someplace else. As Joan is going through this, she's probably at his side. She's probably watching as that last Eucharist is placed into Joan's mouth. She's thinking through that it's the end of a reign after only 4 months on the throne. She's thinking that through. I think we have to understand that, her son Jaume is alive, so she's also, if she's preparing for Joan's death, she's imagining that she'll be a queen regent. And so the pressure's on to figure out how she's going to negotiate power as her son grows up. So all these thoughts had to have been in place because she knows, because of what's happened to Sibylla de Fortia, that if Joan dies, she's in big trouble. She's in big trouble, and she has to act before she's acted upon. And then, of course, I think she had real affection for Joan, and I think that she would grieve his death. I don't really have any documentary evidence to say there's that emotional connection other than molt cara compagnona. So, thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.